May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, the great I am, our rock, our creator, our redeemer. Amen. There is a place in western Iowa that is impossible to find unless you have already been there. It's a bit like Brigadoon. But if you go out on the back roads, you will find hidden in the overgrowth a set of concrete stairs. They don't go anywhere. They just go up. 1, 2, 3, thin air. There was a church there, but in the early 1900s it burned down, and all that is left is a small patch of graves and these steps. They still have their metal railings. Local legend has it that if you go at midnight on a full moon, and you take off your shoes, and you walk up the stairs once, twice, 3 times, backwards, and then jump off, you will feel the bottom of your feet start to burn a big, raging, unmistakable burn. You can imagine how popular it is with the high school students, particularly in Iowa, where I can attest that there is very little else to do. And sure, it's a good scare your date spot, but I also think it's popular because there's something in all of us that is craving to know. To know that there is something else, to know perhaps that God is, to feel it in our bones. Isn't that a bit of why we come here each week? Now, each time I am out there, I'm tempted to go. Not because I believe there are special places that hold secrets about the world beyond us, but precisely because I think that every place is a special place that can hold secrets about the world beyond us. Secrets about God, and some places there are just burning bushes to help us see. Largely, I think this is because there are places where we let the little kid out in us. That little part of us that allows for the impossible. On a normal basis, we are all very grounded by the deadline we didn't meet, the harsh reality that we call the news, the principles of physics, which to me honestly might as well just be magic. But there are these moments that stop us, that back us up, and that force a distance. For example, when I was 8 or 9, my mom and I went out to lunch, like we always did after church. And I remember sitting down, and I was in the middle of dipping a fry in ketchup, I think we were at Hardee's, when she took my hand, and she put it in hers, and she held it tightly, and she said, "Take good care of these, okay?" And I was so confused. She put down my hand, and then she put the tips of her fingers together, and she pushed her palms inward and said, "Look, I can't get my palms together anymore." I was still very confused. "But look, Mom," I said with all the innocence of youth, putting my hands together, "it's easy, just do this." It was the first time I had ever noticed that she has these big, beautiful hands, very big knuckles. And the rest of her is so dainty. But in that moment, something began to shift for me. My mom wasn't just my mom, this being that existed to feed me fries, but a person who had these hands. Hands that had seen things and touched things and known things that I would never know. And at the time, she was just a few years younger than I am currently, and notice now that I cannot push my palms together. 15 years after that, there was a moment when I realized that they were her father's hands. The same strength and shape and feel. The vertical ridges on the nails that he used to say were the signs of wisdom. The long fingers that made spanning an octave on a piano look easy. My grandfather was very sick at the time, and we all knew it was the end. And so I climbed up next to him in the bed. I curled up with him in that hospital bed, and I felt his sickness radiate from him as heat. And I thought maybe I could absorb some of it. Maybe I could absorb some of him. And I did. I wrapped my arms around his back and I took his hand in mine, and it was at that moment that I saw it. It wasn't a trick, it wasn't an illusion or a vision or a premonition, it just was. There on that hospital bed, I was holding my mother's hand and I was holding my own hand. Flat and wide and ridged and beautiful, they were burning up, and I was burning up, and like that bush, I wondered whether I would be consumed. God was screaming at me through that hospital, Johnny, tread carefully, girl, pay attention to this, remember you are standing on holy ground. And of all the moments to think of on that hospital bed, all of the moments of my life, it was that moment in Hardee's that came flooding back to me. Because suddenly I understood what all those years ago I hadn't. It wasn't my hands that my mother was worried about. It was time. I don't know what it was that provoked her in that moment, but watching me obliviously dip my fries into ketchup, I know she was looking straight into a time when my fingers would begin to be knotted and pruned with age, looking straight into a time when she couldn't protect me or hold me or shield me, but knowing that her hands, my grandfather's hands, would be there. And just like that, just by paying attention, that moment in the 80s, Hardee's became holy ground. Now, we all have those moments in life when that veil between heaven and earth slips away just a little. We know to look for them in some places, like a hospital bed or abandoned church steps, but they can be anywhere. Waving goodbye to your baby on the first day of school, making cookies using grandma's recipe, hearing a special song, holding a newborn's tiny little hand on one finger, watching an entire state show up to sandbag. If you pay attention, any time can become this moment where all too clearly you can see that veil between heaven and earth, past and present, life and death slip just a crack, just enough. Just enough to catch your breath with its significance. Just enough to hear God whisper out to you, come no closer. Remove your sandals because you are standing on holy ground. Ground zero, so to speak. We all know where we were on that day, if we were on that day. For many in El Paso, that day was yesterday. For some in Dayton, that day was this day. For some, it was Martin Luther King Jr.'s death or Kennedy's, the day when time stops and any illusion of a separation between our past and our present disappears, and suddenly the future opens up before us darkly. Wherever you saw the burning that wouldn't stop, and wondered whether we would be consumed. Now, this isn't to say that time hadn't stopped elsewhere long before that day. The violence that we see is nothing new. In fact, what it is to say is precisely this: as a people of faith, we are able to go through history and to look at events like these without fear, or at least without standing paralyzed by fear, because we know these things have happened before, and each time, just when you expect silence, God whispers, I am. But who are you, Moses asks. I have an entire enslaved people here, God. Tell me what to tell them. I have a people wondering how to go forward after slavery, after terrorism, after gun violence, after racism. I have a people scraping out mud from their basements after a hurricane or a flood. But God says, relax, Moses, I am. I am the God of your grandparents and your grandparents' parents. You see me in the hands that bundled you up and put you in a basket and floated you down the Nile, in the hands that bathed you while you were in Pharaoh's house, in the hands of the first responders that carried your body, that are building a fountain of grace where ashes once stood. I am in the hands that fed you fries with ketchup, that appear to you now in this time and place, and will hold you again when you are aged and in a hospital bed, and will sit with you when you return to this mountain with your freed people and say to them, I am. The God of your ancestors is because you are. Just pay attention. Take off your sandals. You are on holy ground. Now I know for many of us, we walk up the front stairs of this place and we know that it is special. You hear the choir rehearsing perhaps, you see the familiar faces, and that feeling is unmistakable. You don't have to walk upstairs backwards and jump off to know that you are on holy ground. But as we begin our time together with our ministries together, and as back to school ads already start popping up, and as we come into the very fast pace of our daily life, facing the world around us, the gun violence, the politics, the school systems, the homework, the meetings, I'm getting exhausted just reading the list. I have a challenge for you. Make this place in your life holy. Make this place in your life holy. We are going to make mistakes with each other, you and I. Occasionally, I'm going to do things in a way you really don't like. And then teaching Sunday school or going to confirmation or heck, even getting up early enough to come to church is going to feel like an obligation. And this place can start to feel like the world out there, which is a little too grounded, a little too real, and a little too busy. And when you find that happening, take off your sandals. Remind yourself that this is a place in your life where you pay attention, where you learn to pay attention. Let this be a place in your life where you allow for the impossible. Because if you do, you just might hear what I hear. The voice of God saying, I am. Thanks be to God. Now our hymn of thanksgiving is a new one. It's a relatively simple tune.